extend my welcome to you all as well as the congregation. Thank you all who are here because of your own faithfulness in Christ Jesus. And for those who are visiting with us, we thank you for being here. And for all mothers, this is the Lord's Day, but as the world looks at it, it is also Mother's Day to them and to us. But it's Mother's Day because somebody said, let's just set aside a day for that. We're not going to trump the Lord's Day by that, but I do want to point out something about Jesus Christ and His mother. So if you will take your Bible and turn to John chapter 19 as you see on the screen. Of course, the name of Jesus is the name above all names. This is His day. But getting to that day, becoming the first day of the week, being owned by Jesus Christ through His death and then His resurrection on the first day of the week, it's His day, and it always will be His day. His name is the focus. But as we're looking at the story of Jesus Christ, let us not forget that it wasn't on one single day that Jesus honored His mother. He honored His mother at all times. As He hung on the cross, looking in John chapter 19, I want you to notice the soldiers had divided the garments. They had been engaging in cruel mocking, treating Him like they were giving Him some respect as a king, but all in mockery and in jest. Putting a robe on Him and then stripping it off of Him. Putting a crown of thorns on His head and beating it with a rod into His scalp. Then nailing Him to a cross. And there He is before the crowd. And they're looking at Him and they're hearing all of this ugly talk about this man. And there in the midst of the crowd is Jesus' mother. And her heart has to be breaking. And Jesus knows her heart is breaking. One of the prophets, Luke chapter 2, said this about Mary's son, that this child is destined for the fall and rising again of many in Israel. 30 so years later, there were lots of Israelites falling. Their relationship to God was at its all-time low. You couldn't get any lower than that. But He was also destined for the rising again of many in Israel. And the prophet said to Jesus' mother, and yes, a sword shall pierce your own soul also. Now she had watched this little baby, and she had heard what the angels had said about his future. She had carried all of those thoughts in her heart and pondered them and thought about them over and over again. She watched her child become the outcast in the family. And now she's seeing him treated like he was the worst sinner in the world. And she knew that was not so. So she focuses on Jesus, and Jesus looks down from the cross, and he sees John, the disciple that loved Jesus so much and that Jesus loved. Jesus, being the firstborn, had the authority in the family, especially now that Joseph is out of the picture. He must have died. Verse 25 says, "Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother, and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, 'Woman, behold your son.' Then he said to the disciple, 'Behold your mother.' And from that hour, that disciple took her to his own home." Now, there's several things that are touching, of course, about the scene here. But I'd like us to think about the overall, some other things that we would gather into this scene from previously. She had watched her son grow through all the stages that we watch our children grow. And she loved him even though others treated him oddly. Like he's different. He's strange. Today's vernacular, we might say, he's weird because he's different. Well, that's a matter of perspective. But the mother never thought that. She loved him, though others thought he was a bit different. Nothing wrong with him except he just stood out. Luke 2:47, the priests and those who were teachers of the law, they were just fascinated. Here's a 12-year-old boy, and he is able to converse intelligently in regard to many, many difficult passages of Scripture. Just take your Old Testament and flip through some of the Scriptures in the book of Isaiah, for example. Isaiah 11, probably one of the most difficult passages, would be one of those things that Jesus could have right there at 12 years old been, hey, this young man has a grasp on passages that we find very challenging at our level. And in John 7:46, later on, as Jesus was older, people thought, wow, listen to him. Nobody speaks like this man. So he was different. He was unique. He was pure, but that's unique. She loved him, though others thought that he was odd. She loved him even when others began to hate him. When words came out his mouth that challenged people, some people did not like to be challenged. When he got on to people's religious ideas and traditions, Some people did not like that at all. And here's Mary observing all of these things that are going on in regard to her son. That they're speaking evil of him. They're talking bad about my son. Matthew chapter 12 verse 14, they plotted and they hated him so much they were plotting to kill him. I don't know how much of that spread around as far as information getting back to Mary, but they're talking about my son and he's done nothing wrong. She loved him, even when others began to hate him and speak evil of him. Because there's something about a mother's love, fathers too, that's steady, that's anchored, that's strong. It's like the prodigal son. He might not have liked the rules of love at home, but he knew he could always count on that love. He could always go back. Why? Because I just know deep down inside that my Father loves me enough that He will willingly and easily forgive me if I ask Him. And a mother's love is like that. She loved him even when he was hanging in shame. And you hear all of this crowd in their ignorance saying such things as, well, he saved the others, didn't he? Why can't he save himself? Come down from the cross. And I know those words just had to penetrate her soul, her heart, as she had to cringe, knowing that those words were uttered in extreme ignorance. And she's not pitching in with them. She is not thinking, yeah, he's hanging there in a shameful way. I'm embarrassed at him. I'm embarrassed that he used the kind of words that made these people mad at him. She was embarrassed at them. She was not embarrassed at her son. She loved him when he was hanging naked, bleeding, in the most humiliating scene that you can imagine. And a scornful crowd casting such ignorant words in their mouths. In Luke 23, the record shows us in verse 35, Luke 23 for 35 says this, and the people stood looking on, but even the rulers with them sneered, saying, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming and offering him sour wine, saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. And an inscription was also written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, this is the King of the Jews. And Jesus' mother is hearing all of that, and seeing all of that. But she remembers what the angel had told her. And she remembered what each of those prophets had told her. And yes, indeed, a sword was penetrating her own soul, just as had been predicted when Jesus was a baby. And in all that, I guess we can just sum it up by just saying that a mother is usually dependable when it comes to love. I know there are exceptions, and there are exceptions to that, but Jesus knew what Mary had been through. And so I want us to look at it now from Jesus' perspective. Jesus watched his mother. He watched her deal with the family. He watched her emotionally. How do you deal with children that treat the firstborn so disrespectfully? And I know we have to use our imagination in some of this, and some of it we can gather from how Joseph's brothers treated him, because he is a type of Jesus. And remember that they despised Joseph and hated him until Joseph became a ruler in the land of Egypt. And then their eyes were opened, and the same is going to be true here. The disciples, or the brothers rather, of Jesus are not disciples of Jesus. Look at John chapter 7, and I'd like you to notice with me, starting with verse 2 of John 7. It says, "Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand. His," talking about Jesus' brothers, "therefore said to him, Depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you're doing." They were very much aware that Jesus was hated by those people in Jerusalem. And they were hoping Jesus would go to Jerusalem and show his power there and be put on the spot, and then no telling what evil might take place there. But they said this, "You go, make it known what you're doing, for no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For even his brothers did not believe in him. They didn't. And I'm wondering, well, how does that affect a mother when she sees that her family is divided? Well, I know how it affects. It is disappointing. It stretches your emotions one way or the other. You know this is not the way it ought to be, but this is the way it is now. And unfortunately, I can't reason with them. I told them. They do not believe it apparently. I told them that he was going to be great, that he was going to be the king of the world one day. But they wouldn't believe it. And so Jesus knows his mother's heart broke over the way the other children acted. And that she could not apparently convince them. Jesus watched his mother deal with those heartbreaking struggles. He watched her struggle when all the other children were not there for her. Are they standing around the cross there supporting their mother? No. The truth was in her heart, but it wasn't in their heart. They didn't believe yet. He committed her care to a true disciple. One of the greatest compliments that Ann and I have received is two different occasions. Faithful disciples lived in a divided family. And whereas they said, our children, I want them to be raised in a godly home. I want them to be raised where I know that they'll get the guidance that will help them go to heaven. And I know that if I leave my children with my earthly family, that the chances of my children going to heaven shrink, and I don't want that. And so on two different occasions, we were honored by someone requesting that in the event that they were to die, they said, we want you to raise our children. And I can see the wisdom of Jesus saying, I want my mother not to have to be worried about her physical needs. I don't want her fretting about that. And I know I can depend on John. And so he committed her care to a true disciple that he can trust. And that principle rolls over into everybody that follows Jesus has got to take on that principle. You can see it in Paul writing this to Timothy. For example, in 1 Timothy chapter 5, notice that here's a follower of Jesus Christ who has the same mentality of Jesus about responsibility to your parents. Well, Paul is using that here in 1 Timothy chapter 5. And he says, do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father. Treat older men in the congregation like they were your fathers. And the younger men as brothers. The older women, treat them as mothers. The younger as sisters, with all purity. And then he says, honor widows. And here's what Jesus was doing on the cross. He knows she's a widow. And he honors her. Honor widows who are really widows. That is, widows that don't have any family that can take care of them. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety, respect at home, and to repay their parents. Look, your parents paid a lot for you, children. Your parents paid and have been paying and are still paying a lot. So repay your parents. You owe them that. For this is good and acceptable before God. Now, she who is really a widow, that is, she doesn't have anybody and left alone, she trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. That is, she's spiritually dead. And these things command that they may be blameless. In other words, Jesus prepared for the care of his widowed mother. In her declining years, he took care. He saw to it. Since I'm dying and I'm not going to be here, John, would you take her? Now, I've said all of that to get to this. It is God's law that we honor our parents. In Ephesians chapter 6, I want you to notice with me verses 1 through 3. This principle was a righteous principle. Andrew pointed out very well in these last two lessons that righteousness continues on. The vehicle that carries it might be no longer in operation, but the righteousness that had been carried along by that vehicle, the law of Moses, that righteousness now keeps going. That standard of righteousness does not stop because the vehicle that carried it is now nailed to the cross. Righteousness continues on. And that's why Paul has no problem at all quoting the law and saying this righteous principle still applies. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It's the right thing to do. There is right and righteousness. And this is something that is always right. It's not a type or a shadow of the law that finds fulfillment in Jesus Christ and then ends. It's right and it will always be right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment in the Decalogue, as we speak of it in Exodus chapter 20. The 10 Commandments. You go down the list, reading the list, this is the one you get a promise attached to it. And what is the promise? That it may be well with you. I mean, you're doing yourself a good favor if you honor your parents. You're doing yourself a great disservice if you don't. This is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you, and you may live long on the earth. Just think of the troubles that we bring upon ourselves because we don't listen to them and don't respect them. It's God's law that you recognize this, that they have gone through all of the experiences you have gone through, and surely they learned something. Somewhere along the line, they had your experiences plus what their parents told them and the experiences that you have accumulated so far, which are nothing compared to theirs. And surely, he says, we can honor somebody if for no other reason. We can honor the fact that their experiences should give them the edge. At least listen to them. It'll be well with you. I have not known of many mothers or fathers who said, I want you to do this because you'll get burned and it might hurt you, and I want you to get hurt. Now they teach you things to avoid getting hurt. Why? Because they have invested their heart in you. They're invested in you, whereas nobody else is invested. Friends will abandon you, like the prodigal son got all these friends as long as they were having a great party, you know. Everybody was on board and hee-hawing and having a great time until he ran out of money, and then we don't have any use for him anymore. What I'm saying in that is there was still one dependable resource of somebody who actually cared about him instead of just cared about using him. And that's the parents. They're invested. A big part of their heart is invested in you. They've done without some things because they wanted you to have some things. I remember my parents telling me as a young boy that I want you to have what I didn't have a chance to have. And they did the best they could. They invested in me and my brother and sister. It's God's law. And Jesus is the example of it. That you honor. You think about who's actually caring for you. And understand, some of the rules may not be enjoyable, but the reason they gave them is because they love you like nobody else loves you. Deuteronomy chapter 10 tells us in verse 12, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, to serve the Lord God, your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes which I command you today for your good." It's for your good. God didn't give us rules because he hated us. He wanted us to squirm, but he wanted us to have the best plan for living successfully. That is, living the life that is going to get you somewhere very important, and keep you from other paths that will destroy you. It's for your good. It's for your good that you honor your father and your mother. One last passage. Romans chapter 13. Look at verse 8. You owe this. He says, "Owe no man anything except," and this is a biggie, "owe no one anything except to love one another." That's what you owe one another. That's what we owe each other here. You owe it. I owe it. We owe it. We may not owe anything else, but we owe this, and that's a biggie. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. And then he quotes the law. Remember, we said righteousness is a continual thing. Here are righteous principles from the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery. If you love somebody, you will not commit adultery. You will not use another person for selfishness, because you know that you're sending them to hell and you're sending yourself to hell and you're destroying a marriage. So don't do that. That's not love at all. You shall not murder. Love will not allow you to do that. But if you're murdering somebody, either with your words or with your attitude, or actually physically murdering somebody, you obviously do not know love, and you do not love. You shall not steal. You steal from somebody, you don't love them. You're selfish. You shall not bear false witness. You make up something about somebody, you must not love that person. You shall not covet. You don't want them to enjoy it, and you want to have it yourself, and you're jealous that they have it. You covet. Well, you don't love them, do you? And if there is any other commandment, and would that not apply to Ephesians chapter 6, which quotes from the 10 Commandments, honor your father and your mother? If you love, and that's what you owe them. You owe them that. It's all summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And have you ever thought about the fact that our own parents are our neighbor too? Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Several years ago, some of the young people never heard of Jimmy Dean, but he was a great writer of songs, as well as star on certain shows like Daniel Boone and shows like that. Well, he wrote this, and I want to share it with you. Many people look through their wallet or their pocketbooks way down at the bottom past the credit cards and baby pictures and so on. You usually find a little old piece of dog-eared poetry. I was cleaning out my wallet the other day and ran across a whole bunch of IOUs, some of them 35 years overdue. And you know the funny thing, all these IOUs are owed to one person. And I kind of felt like that maybe now would be a pretty good time for an accountant. Mom, I sure hope you're listening. Sweet lady, I owe you for so many things. A lot of services like night watchman, for instance, lying awake nights, listening for coughs and cries and creaking floorboards, and me coming in too late. Boy, you had an eye of an eagle and the roar of a lion, but you always had a heart as big as a house. I owe you for services like a short order cook, chef, baker, for making sirloin out of hamburger and turkey out of tuna fish, and big old strapping boys out of leftovers. I owe you for cleaning services, the daily scrubbing of face and ears, all work done by hand, and for the frequent dusting of a small boy's pants to try to make sure that you led a spotless life, and for washing and ironing that no laundry could ever do, for drying the tears of childhood and ironing out the problems of growing up. I owe you for services as a bodyguard, for protecting me from the terrors of thunderstorms and nightmares and too many green apples. And Lord knows I owe you for medical attention, for nursing me through measles, mumps, bruises, bumps, splinters, and spring fever. And let's not forget medical advice, important things like if you keep on scratching that, it'll never get well, or if you cross your eyes, you're going to stick like that. And probably the most important advice of all, boy, you be sure you got on clean underwear in case you're in an accident. And I owe you for veterinarian services, for feeding every lost dog that I dragged home at the end of a rope, and for healing the pains of puppy love. And I owe you for entertainment that kept the household going through some pretty rough times, and for wonderful productions at Christmas, the 4th of July, and birthdays, and for making make-believe come true, and you did it all on such a limited budget. I owe you for construction work, for building kites and confidence, hopes and dreams, and somehow you made them all touch the sky, and for cementing together a family so it would stand the worst kind of shocks and blows, and for laying down a good, strong foundation to build a life on. I owe you for carrier charges, for carrying me on your books for the necessities of life. That a growing boy somehow, well, they just got to have things like a pair of high-top boots with a little pocket knife on the side, or a little pocket on the side for a jackknife. Those are important things. And one thing, Mom, I'll never forget, when there were 2 pieces of pie and 3 hungry people, you are always the one who decided, well, I'm not really hungry. These are just a few of the things for which payment is long overdue. The person that I showed them to worked very, very cheap. She managed by simply doing without a lot of things that she needed herself. My IOUs add up to more than I could ever hope to repay. But you know the nicest thing about it all? That I know that she had marked the entire bill paid in full for just one kiss and 4 little words. Mom, I love you. We owe that, don't we? Just those little words. And as Jesus was hanging from the cross, I'm sure Jesus reflected back on all of those moments, all the turmoil, the sleepless nights, the unbelieving brothers, all of those heartaches piled into one big heart that was still standing there by his side, right there at the foot of the cross. Her being there said, I love you. And his last word says, I love you too, Mom. I hope that we will learn from Jesus the greatest principles of life. And those are that you take the Word of God into your heart and you live by them. Yes, even this one. And let's serve God wisely. We owe that to our parents. We owe that to one another. But we mainly owe that to the Lord. He's the one that died for us. He loved us to the death. You want to be a part of what Jesus is offering. You want to be in fellowship